In terms of this conversation that we've had, I guess, in 5 cities at this point, hip-hop activism in the Obama Tea Party era, we're really just kind of looking at the ways that hip-hop has been a political force in elections and young people getting more politically engaged. Going back to, if you go back to 2004, the jump in youth voter participation between 2000 and 2004 was a 9% increase. The jump between 2004 and 2008 was an additional 5% increase. And so the real question is, what is going to happen? One of the questions is what's going to happen in 2012, A, and then I guess the second question is, what do we do after the election? Because I think in 2008, there was such a focus on getting the candidate that people wanted elected that I think after they got him elected, they kind of stood like deer in the proverbial headlights and watched another movement emerge and take over the whole entire momentum. So what we've been saying to people is, it's not about Obama, it's not about the presidential election, it's about what are we going to do and how we're going to organize after the election, before the election. And so we got a group of folks here today that do this work full time. In 2004, I was one of the organizers of the National Hip Hop Political Convention, and we brought 4,000 people to Newark to create and endorse a political agenda for the hip hop generation. Davey D, who's sitting in the front row, was a part of it. Boots was a part of it. Shamako was a part of it. Angela was a part of it. And so we saw that young people were not always given the information that they needed to make these kind of informed decisions and to start thinking past the election itself. And so we hope that this conversation is going to help help you to think about those things in those different ways. So we don't just want people to only think about getting someone elected for office, because voting is only one tool at your disposal. So we want you to think about the other tools that you have in addition to that. And we want to talk about what's going on in these communities around the country. And so that's really where we're going with this. So with us today, we have immediately closest to me, Adam Mansbach, who is the New York Times best-selling author. He has the new book out that's driving everybody nuts. It's been out for less than a year, called Go to F and Sleep. But I don't know, is it Go to F and Sleep on the cover, or is it? Yeah. So if you haven't seen it, he says it's a children's book for adults, which I think is a neat little thing he does. Adam also has written about 4 or 5 other novels. I can't keep up. The one that is my favorite is Angry Black White Boy, which is taught on over 60 college campuses, and I think is going to continue to be taught for a very long time. He also has a new book out, which is a graphic novel called, what was that title? I was going to say The Beast Within. The Nature of the Beast. And he does a lot of different things, including recently he was a New Voices Professor of Fiction at Rutgers University. Next to Adam is, he also got a 2008 Book Award for his book, The End of the Jews. Next to Adam is Angela Woodson, and Angela Woodson has been involved in electoral politics and grassroots activism for probably since she was a teenager. She made her mark in Ohio. She's run and been involved in presidential campaigns, mayoral campaigns, governor's races. She ran a campaign for a congressional race. And so she's one of my go-to people whenever I'm trying to make sense out of some of the stuff that generally doesn't make sense to most people, so don't feel confused when something is happening that doesn't make sense, because it happens a lot of times, and it's been going on for a long time. So Angela most recently was the director of faith-based and community outreach for the Ohio Governor's Office. the previous governor, not the current one. She also started an organization called BUILD, Blacks United in Search of Local Democracy, which has gotten several scores of folks elected to office. So she's going to bring that level of expertise to the conversation. She most recently has a consulting organization called Jellic Group. Next to Angela is Shamako Noble. And Shamako is somebody who I've known for over a decade now, I guess. And he's one of these people that won't let you forget what you said. So for years, I have been talking about the importance of local organizing and the importance of local organizers. And when we look back at the civil rights and the Black Power movements, some of the leaders of those movements will tell you that one of the reasons that it failed, some of the efforts failed, was because so many people were anxious to kind of step into this national arena instead of continuing to do the work at the local level. So Shamako told some of my words back to me, which was, you don't have anybody from San Jose on this panel. And so it was good. It's always good to be humbled and to do what you're supposed to do and to have people like Shamako who tell you about yourself. So Shamako is an MC. He's also the co-founder of an organization called the Hip Hop Congress, and they have been functioning on college campuses and beyond for, I want to say, going back into the late 90s, right? 1997. So he brings a wealth of knowledge as an activist in many different movements, which I'm sure he's going to talk about. He also is an MC and a battle rapper at some point, and has earned the affectionate name, the Sword of the West. So I'll let you figure it out once he gets started what that means. And last but not least, on the very end is Boots Riley, the co-founder of the Coup. When I first met Boots, I remember listening to his music in the 90s when I was still at the Source. And then when I met him, I think that the thing that stuck with me and has stuck with me is his ability to balance both his activism and his art. There's only a handful of artists that really do that well. I think M1 of Dead Prez is one of them, Invincible is one, and a handful of others. But I think Boots has been able to do it at a much, for a longer time, and with great consistency that drives people crazy on both sides of the aisle. So he has put out at least 6 albums. The most recent is a collaboration with a group, the Street Sweeper Social Club, and they put out 2 albums, one in 2009 and one in 2010. He has a new album coming out this year. What is it? What is it called? Sorry to Bother You, which made me think of Shamako's new coming album, which is called Personal Problems, or Personal Issues, right? So we get more personal, right? And so Boots most recently was involved with a lot of the Occupy Oakland activity that made a lot of noise, but has done a lot of work over the years, really bringing this marriage between activism and art. So he's going to bring a wealth of knowledge to this conversation, and that's the crew that we have. I want to start with Shamako. And Shamako, just to kind of give us some of the history of some of the national movements that have helped to buttress a lot of the local activity, say over these years that we've seen this growing youth involvement in electoral politics. Some of the organizations and movements and activity, including a little bit of the history of your own group, if you can.
All right. So the first thing I want to do is just talk a little bit about the history of the institution that we're at in relationship to the conversation that we're having.
Okay.
How many people in here have seen the Tommy Smith statue so far by show of hands? Okay, so a lot of you got it. So for anyone who hasn't, please take a moment to look at that. There's a famous moment, what is it, the 68 Olympics, is that right? Where two gentlemen who were students here put up the Black Power sign. It was an image that was burned into the collective consciousness of the globe for many years to come. That statue is right over there, so that's like one element of this.
Thank you, Shamako.
For sure. So a couple notes. One, so Hip Hop Congress started in 1997. We had our first national conference in 2001. It was on this campus, right across in a lecture hall. Just a lecture hall. It wasn't anything like it. It was just a regular room. It was actually where I met Davey D and Adisa Banjoko, the founder of the Hip Hop Chess Federation. Across the street from that, at a city year office was the first meeting for the San Jose LOC National Hip Hop Political Convention. On this floor, later on that year, was the first event related to the National Hip Hop Political Convention, put on by an organization called Hip Hop Coup. I was at that event. I didn't actually attend the first National Hip Hop Political Convention because, as Bakari said, I was a guy who was stuck here doing things here. So I was connected to the delegation that went. I just didn't get the opportunity to attend myself. In addition, even before that, between 1995 and 1998, there was an institution at San Jose State's radio station, KSJS, referred to as the Underground, DA, Underground. The Underground was actually one of the most organized independent hip-hop shows, or actually collectives, in the West Coast at that time, and probably since that time, and was part of a larger collective known as the Bay Area Hip Hop Coalition. That included our good friend David D and a few other folks. Kind of during the 80s and the 90s, there was a lot of political consciousness. This gentleman was a huge part of it, that helped plant a seed or lay a foundation for what would later emerge in organizational and educational expression. Like for instance, in the 90s, and we'll talk about this more in my workshop, we started to see the generation of a lot of hip-hop and education-based programs. For instance, here in San Jose, we had a group called Fifth Element. It was an all-women, female-based collective. There was also the University of Hip-Hop in Chicago, Jewish Justice by Uniting Individuals in Creative Energy in Los Angeles. And this was one wave of a series of movements that were taking place. The next wave, of course, was more focused on hip-hop and politics, which a lot of the people here on this panel helped generate. There were also sort of local manifestations of that same thing taking place. Congress is actually an artist-based institution. We started Congress as artists because we felt like it was a good opportunity for artists to create a self-sustaining network, right? Artists creating opportunities for other artists, kind of in rebellion to the industry and all of the red tape around it. The thing that we discovered was whenever you create a body or an organizational form, you create the space for a political conversation. Because that was a political action, even if we didn't see it that way at the time. This was like 97, 2000. With the emergence of the National Hip Hop Political Convention, what happened was there was a stated space to begin having individual, collective, local, and national conversations about direct political outcomes. Prior to that moment, even though people were doing individual pockets of work, a lot of our political expression came through the art or the culture itself. This marked the transition from just the expression of it to the actual execution of it. That makes the slapstick a very interesting decade, because that process came with a lot of ups and downs and challenges and whatnot. I'm not going to get too deep into that, but kind of from there, following that, and this is part of what I'm going to talk about later, even beyond hip-hop and electoral politics was a larger framework, right, around hip-hop and liberation. I call it hip-hop and human rights, but I feel like Occupy was one of the expressions of that. Of course, Boots Riley here was, for better or for worse, an extremely visible leader in Coup and Occupy. Also out of Seattle, an organization emerged called Hip Hop Occupies, which ended up creating a lot of language for groups that were operating elsewhere. That's a decent bit of joke right there. He's part of the Hip Hop Chess Federation. You'll be hearing from him later. Right, yeah, sit down now. That's happy. So anyway, again, there's schools of thought on this, but in response to his question, from my perspective, there's been waves of development And for note, your presence here in this conversation, whatever you guys do with this conversation, is included in those waves of development. So don't see yourselves too much as like passive observers, because I don't think that anyone up here feels that situation.
Thank you, Shamako. That was excellent. I can ask you a million other questions. I wanted to hear from everybody else in the conversation before we run out of time. You raised the question of artists really being a part of the movement, and I think that was something that had been missing for some time in terms of a national arts-based organization until the Congress emerged. I wondered, Boots, if there was something that Shamako said that you wanted to react to or build on in terms of the role of artists in the movement first, and then if you want to talk some about your involvement with Occupy, I think it's a good time for us to jump right in there.
I think that art is just another way to communicate. It's another way to talk. If you're making art and you are also a human being that's thinking about the world and wants things to be different, if you don't include that in your art, you're not being true to yourself, because you're purposely censoring yourself based on what you think that art form is supposed to sound like or look like, and not based on what you have inside yourself. And anytime you have an audience, whether it's 2 people or 4 people or 50,000 people, you would hope that whatever you're using to communicate, whether that's just spoken word or whether that's music, is saying something worth their while. My first time, I was a youth organizer before I took my art form seriously. One of the things that helped me take that art form seriously was I was doing some work in the Double Rock projects in San Francisco, and we would go there every week. I was part of some organization that had some vague kind of call, like fight racism or something like that. And, we'd go door to door there every Sunday, selling the paper, getting people's names, getting people signed up and talking about police brutality or this or that. One time, in the middle of one of these weekends, an incident happened where a woman named Rossi Hawkins and her 2 twin sons her 2 twin 8-year-old sons got beat down bloody by the San Francisco Police Department. Like, the mother and the kids were beat down bloody. Now, the context to this was just 2 weeks before there had been a case where that same police officers from that same area had beat somebody up and rode them around in the back of their car for hours without taking them to the hospital, and they died. So the neighborhood of Double Rock saw this mother and her kids beat up on the ground, and they all immediately came out. Hundreds of people out surrounding these cops. The cops got scared and started shooting up in the air. If you've ever been around a gunshot, whatever you came to do right before then, up until then, you forget it, and you're out of there because you realize your life could be over with. So the crowd quickly dispersed and started running away. And at some point, people decided to run back. By the end of the night, they had gotten Rossi Hawkins and her 2 twin sons into a separate car, took them to the hospital on their own. A police car was turned over, and the cops ran out of there on foot. When this story was told to us as we came back the next time, it was told in a lot of different ways with a lot of hyperbole and different stories. What I've told you so far is the one that matches what everybody said happened. The other part that matches what everybody said happened is this. It was the summer of 1989. The top song on the radio was Fight the Power by Public Enemy. People said that when everyone was running away from the police, somebody started chanting, "Fight the power. Fight the power. Fight the power." And that made people turn back. And that's when I realized that's the power that music could have, the power that hip hop could have. It's a rallying cry. When you listen to music, you relate to it, and you know that you're not the only one relating to this. You know that somebody else somewhere else is feeling the same way. So it immediately creates some sort of unity. And that's when I decided to, you know, get better at what I was doing. You know, there were already other people doing it, and Disa Banjoko actually was, you know, was somebody that was around at San Francisco State at that time that was already making records. I was like, how did you put that on the recording? How does that work? You know, and they were out there doing it. And that was when I knew what could be done. So I don't think that artists have a particular role more than any other human being. But if you're an artist, you're deciding that you have something, an emotion, a feeling, a thought that's worth communicating to people. And if you're going to do that, you need to dig deep and be true about that. And so that's going to have to do with connecting with movements that are happening for change. I've recently been involved in the Occupy Oakland movement, and people, and the thing is that this is a movement, Occupy Wall Street movement, that's the first time in a long time, and by a long time I mean decades, where first of all, there's a movement that people can see that's happening, that people can plug into in different ways, and people are plugging into in different ways. They had Occupy Nigeria. They shut down the country for a whole week and caused a whole renegotiation of the fuel prices. When they did Occupy Nigeria, they were like, Occupy Nigeria, so they had the whole living room out in the, they were taking pictures of the people with the whole living rooms out in the middle of the street. The whole country was shut down. It wasn't a symbolic general strike. It was no railroads were working, no airports were working, no industry was working, hundreds of thousands of people out on the street all over the place. In Oakland, we had a general strike. Just last week, 3 days ago, we shut down a foreclosure auction and saved Nell Myhan's home from being foreclosed on. 2 weeks before that, we shut down Union Bank and made them modify a loan on Katie Mitchell's house. This is stuff that's being done with direct action. We're starting a fast food workers union. Why? Normally when people have tried to start fast food workers union, what do? They get fired. Well, one thing, whatever anyone agrees upon or disagrees upon about Occupy Oakland, they know we can shut some shit down. So we're starting a fast food workers union with the caveat that if any one of these franchise owners fires somebody for joining or organizing the union, they're going to be shut down. So it's one of the first times in history where, in recent history, where we can have a mass movement that's focused on things that people are really thinking about and caring about. I mean, I've been involved in grassroots organizations at various levels for the last few decades. And one of the things is that, you know, we focus on things that are important and that are important to us as organizers. Police brutality, you know, the GA, the IMF. Those are ideas that some of them are more abstract than others. Police brutality is not abstract, but the idea of how you change things around that has been pretty abstract. You have a long campaign, and at the end, a cop gets transferred, and people kind of burned out on that. But what people are dealing with every day, that many organizations have not had their finger on the pulse of, is people are dealing with survival. And that mass movements in the past have had something that had to do with changing people's immediate material reality. So, Occupy Oakland is not an all-black organization. I've been involved in an all-black organization called Young Comrades before. It's not an all-people of color organization. I've been involved in radical organizations that were people of color organizations and radical organizations that were all black, and none of them had as many black folks from the hood as Occupy Oakland did. And why is that? That's because we're dealing with the real things that people are dealing with every day. We're not saying get involved in the struggle because it serves some abstract, higher moral ground to be involved in something that's beyond yourself. That's good. But it also is saying that we can change things right now. And it puts up the tactic of stopping profit as a way to negotiate change. And what that does is say, first of all, it takes having a class analysis to know that this system is not just about oppression, but it's about exploitation. You know, slavery was not just about oppression. It was oppressive, but it was oppressive so that it could be exploited.
Bruce, I want to ask you, what made you? Because Occupy in the beginning, there was a lot of criticism. People were saying it was diverse enough. People were saying this is a bunch of middle class white kids. What was it that made you feel this is something different, and I'm going to get involved in this?
Well, first of all, let's take it back 6 months before that. The criticism of people in the United States was that people were too middle class to get involved in the movement. So, even if that was the criticism, that these were a bunch of middle class white kids, that would have been a major progression in movement building in the United States. However, that is not the case, because most of the people you see down there are people that are dedicated to making change. You know, especially in Occupy Oakland, the thing is it had resonance and brought people because there are certain truths that the media wasn't able to hide anymore. You know, people have been doing bad for a while, even in what they call the middle class. I mean, when I went to high school in Oakland in the 80s, they had black families in Oakland thinking they were middle class, right? And that's, middle class just means I'm not as bad as somebody else. That's what, that word, and that's how they get a lot of us from not being involved. Like, it's not as bad as this country, it's not as bad as that city or that neighborhood or whatever. So that criticism never stuck to me. However, on the other hand, Occupy Oakland was created by folks that wanted to use this moment to build a movement that could actually change wealth relationships in the United States. And the folks involved and the folks that are making it happen, at the same time as that criticism was that it was a bunch of middle class folks, there was also the criticism that a large part of the camp were homeless folks. And then, then it didn't quite make sense. And the truth is that there was a large part of the camp that was homeless folks because we were providing food and shelter and safety for folks. And at the same time, a lot of those folks, even though there's no camp left, that came into it because there was free food and free shelter, they're now some of the main organizers of Occupy Oakland.
Yep.
This dude that's really out front there, you see him on the news, named Ali. He was somebody who, and I'm just repeating what he has said. He went there because he said, it's a lot of white folks, I'm going to steal somebody's weed. And he came and sat through a General Assembly and was like, this is the movement that I need to be a part of. The Tactical Action Committee, a bunch of young 18 to 24-year-old, mainly black folks that all used to hang out at 14th and Broadway before Occupy Oakland got there. And now they're one of the leading forces in Occupy Oakland. Basically, a lot of what's said about the Occupy Wall Street movement in general has to do with figuring out what you don't like and telling you that's what the movement is. All Occupy Oakland is the stone in the stone soup. It's people that have Occupy Oakland, it's people that have been trying to make a movement for a long time, and we have this name. Nobody wanted to work together before, and now people are forced to work together. People are forced to work with people that they really don't like, but share a whole bunch of common goals with. And there's a lot of problems. There's people saying fucked up shit to each other. There's people yelling at each other. There's problems of racism. There's problems of sexism. You know what? We got the problems that exist in the whole working class right there. And we're not going to solve them by just standing still and waiting for those things to be solved before we start a movement. And again, it's a movement that is attached to things nationally and internationally. When I walk through the hood, and I live in the hood, when I walk through West Oakland or go to East Oakland, and I've said this just showing as an example to people, if I say to people, you heard Occupy Oakland? Oh yeah, that's that shit, it's all over the world. Then we shut shit down. Sometimes people have the criticism that, oh, that's some white people downtown. Both of those are true. It's not just those white people downtown, but the truth is that all of the movements that we respect, or we're taught to respect, the civil rights movement, made by outside agitators. Martin Luther King was not from Birmingham. They had to ship people in to make those movements work. And my father was an organizer with the NAACP and later CORE, and had the same problems getting his local community involved. That's always going to be the problem. And right now we're fixing that by addressing concerns that people have. And those concerns are economic ones, and ones of being able to change our economic situation through mass movement and direct action that stops profit.
Okay, this is all good because I think it really kind of helps us to get deeper into the larger national conversation. Angela, if you can, I remember two things. One, when Obama was running, one of the things that you kept saying, and we were doing the national tour around hip hop and politics that year, was that he's not going to be able to do anything if there isn't a strong Congress and Senate to back him up. So I want you to talk about that, but I also want you to talk about in the aftermath of the Obama election, one of the things that he kept saying was that he needed more agitation on the ground for him to be able to. And so I'm just curious, seeing where we are now, where do we go from here? Listen to what Boots is saying about Occupy. We have a grassroots movement going on around the country. What is the next step, as you see it, for us to move our agenda using the power and influence of hip hop?
Well, right now, it's just what I said back in 2008. The energy around President Obama was good energy. But he's one person. Be clear, he's one person. There's two bodies, a Senate and a Congress. So somewhere, somehow, something got sold out. Bottom line, something got sold out. And so now you have a Congress and a Senate, whatever, one's a majority in one instance, per se, another's a majority in another instance, but nothing's getting done. And everything's a deadlock. Let's face it, many of you face it not knowing what the status of your student loans and Pell Grants are going to end up looking like. Well, before we go looking at the President of the United States, let's look at the Senate and let's look at the House. See, and this is where it's crucial for the hip-hop activism to start paying attention to these same senators and U.S. Congress people that come before you and say they're about you and your platform, and say, you know, help me get in, because we're going to elect this year. We're going to elect this November. But it's like, bring them back in March of 2013 and say to them, where you at with what you said on the Pell Grant student loan situation? Or where you at with housing? Or where you at with Occupy, Wall Street? What you really doing to really make foreclosure not be foreclosure so I can afford a home when I graduate from this institution. And then call them back again in August of 2013 and ask them the questions again. We have to hold these people accountable. They're loose cannons. I tell people the war you see going on overseas is one war. We got a war going on right here in our own backyard because we're not holding those loose guns in D.C. held accountable. Because they're really not shooting no real bullets. They're shooting blanks. That's why nothing's getting done. But we got to speak up and hold them more accountable. That's why this November, I know what everybody's saying, oh, he's going to get back in, the young people going to push him back in, and President Obama will be back. You know, oh, look at the Mitt Romney, Santa, Newsom, Gingrich, like we were laughing coming in. Who knows what that Sarah Palin talking about, she might get in at the actual convention, right? It's about to be crazy with that institution of folks, right? But in the end, if you notice, it's all an illusion. And make sure you go to JPD. If you went to JPD's workshop, and you need to hear him when he talks about this whole mass media piece and what they're trying to do now with just making things look like a smoke screen and not really giving you all the true facts. Because the reality is, no one's talking about the Senate, no one's talking about the Congress. I got Joe the plumber running in my state. Joe the plumber. Okay? Nobody even knows the man's real name on the Republican side, but Joe the plumber. Okay? And this is the man that supposedly screwed it up for my governor that I work for, and he lost the entire election. But now all of a sudden that justifies him to run for Congress? Joe the plumber? How you feel about voting for somebody, Joe the plumber? Joe the plumber's gonna make a decision on my pay rate. That's it, right? Really? I mean, really? So in today's time, seriously, we really got to energize around the two houses and not get so, the president's race is very important. I don't want you to think it's not. But you've got to organize around these candidates and hold them to the fire. Just don't go to sleep on them after November, but make them come right back to you to talk about where they're at on certain issues that appeal to you.
Angela, I want to ask you a two-part question. One, and both of them are somewhat jarring, and these are questions that have been posed at some of these draft sessions panels. One is the vote a waste of time? And then the second one is, if the Republicans and conservatives can get what they want with Obama as the president, does it matter whether or not they win in 2012?
Wow. Can I start with the second one?
Yeah, start with the second one.
As far as President Obama, I think we've seen it time and time again. It's all about co-opting to try to get what you want. And the conservative party, that's why I said we really got to watch with this particular group to not get so overindulged in the media hype around is it Mitt or is it Santorum. But to really look at who's in the U.S. part of it, Congress, and U.S. Senate candidate part of it, to make sure who they are trying to come on board. Now, do I think they can co-opt the President of the United States, as you're basically trying to say, to get him to sway more conservatively? No, if we keep more progressive people. Let's not lose sleep. It's just not an R party, it's just not a D party. There are some independents. Now, it's not a whole lot of independents in the Congress, but why not we elect some more independents in the Congress? Because to be honest, we're all looking at this and saying, I know in Ohio, are the two parties failing the people? That's been a major conversation piece. We're always saying Republican, we're always saying Democrat, but what have we really seen different over a decade? What are we seeing different? Is it really getting better? So see, these are some of the questions that we need to start getting. And as far as it goes back to, can he be co-opted? I think, again, it becomes on if the progressive leaders all step up and unless people with the progressive agenda to push more for the people and not for the opportunity, then the president's going to be forced to make a decision. And if he chooses to go that route, I wish him well.
And what do you say to someone who says, voting is just a waste of time?
Voting is not a waste of time. It really is your voice. Some of us in this room have had ancestors that have been killed. I know I have had an ancestor I found out that got killed trying to get the right to vote, got shot right in the face trying to cast their vote when they weren't allowed to cast a vote. So one, I tell everybody, it is a historical sense, by honoring our past if nothing more, to cast that vote. And it is your voice. You shouldn't just think, it just doesn't cancel out because this is the presidential year. You should be voting next year because you got local elections. You got mayors and council and everybody else that's out here running that affects your local lives. And you got to make sure you have the same people in place that are going to represent the good for you. I mean, you can't just go check off the president and then go home and shut your dorm door, your apartment door, and think that's it? That's ball game for 4 years? No, it's not ball game for 4 years. Congress comes up every 2 years. Your locals come up every other year. You've got to start holding these people accountable, because if you don't, you see what they're doing. They're saying, well, you're not there, you're not voting, so we're going to do what we want to do.
I'm going to give Adam Mansbach the last word, and then we'll take questions if we still have a little bit of time left. Adam, do you want to build off of something that's already been said, or I'm curious to see your reaction of what's been said already.
There's been so much said already that I don't even know at what point to end it. So why don't you give me some direction, Bakari? Make you earn your pay up here.
I think that the question that I wanted to ask you today is why do you think the divide and conquer strategy around race continues to be so effective? When we came out of 2008, the country seemed to be pretty united. But as we moved into the healthcare conversation, people, shouting out the president in joint sessions of Congress, all kinds of crazy things being said here and there. Like, why is it? And so, like, you get to the point, you get the emergence of the Tea Party, and then you get all of this kind of like division. Like now, going into 2012, the country seems so racially polarized to me, like compared to the way it was coming out of 2008. Just why do you think why does it continue to be so effective?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I would probably take a different slant on the notion that the country was united around racial issues coming to administration. I think that the presidential race of 2008 was remarkably divisive and remarkably split along race lines. If we look back on that election, with some clear-eyed analysis, we can recall that John McCain won the white vote in this country. It's easy to forget that, but John McCain won the majority of the white votes in this country, despite running a historically abysmal, terrible, incompetent campaign. I mean, this cat really did everything wrong that he could have from a campaign analysis perspective, right? Your man fucked up every step of the way. Had no ideas to speak of, was running against a juggernaut, granted, but that juggernaut was partly built on the back of his inadequacies as a candidate. We had a lot of rhetoric in the election cycle last time around debating the particulars of race. Was Barack Obama black enough? Was he too black? Was he post-race? Now, these terms in themselves took center stage at times. The notion of post-racial, which is a problematic term, right? It's in some ways the descendant of a term that I grew up with, in a kind of liberal household in the 80s, which was a well-intentioned but ultimately very problematic term, and that term was colorblind. You were sort of instructed to be colorblind. And what that meant was you shouldn't see people's race, you shouldn't acknowledge people's race because we're supposed to treat everybody the same. Now that sounds good, but in reality, in a society built on racial iniquity and racial hierarchy, to not see racial distinctions simply takes away the tools and takes away the power to be able to make an analysis and say, you know what, if we analyze wealth along racial lines, or education, or sentencing, or police brutality along racial lines, we see certain things. If you are colorblind, you take away your ability to do those things. And that's been used against the well-meaning colorblind liberals of this society for many, many years. And the notion of post-race has sort of filled that void in a sense. And of course, post-race only applies to people who are already racialized to begin with. So the whole conversation of post-race is only around Obama, in a way. There was no discussion of whether Hillary Clinton was too white or not white enough or just perfectly white or, whether your man Mitch
whether mid 10 stacks was, white enough or whatever, we're not talking about whether the bad lieutenant is white enough, So it's only people who are already racialized, i.e. people of color, who sort of become eligible to be post-race. And I think it's also important to realize that the level of vitriol that Obama has faced ever since taking office is deeply racialized, even if it's not articulated as such. So when we see the blatant disrespect with which he's treated, first of all, understand that those aren't emotional outbursts. When, what's your man's name, Joe Wilson? When Joe Wilson is like, you lied, right? This has never happened before in the history of this country. I mean, we used to have guys, dueling to the death, but nobody has actually showed that level of blatant disrespect to a sitting president in an official setting ever, to my knowledge. Didn't happen to George Bush when he took us to a false war, right? But it's race in part that underlies this level of aggression. When a Joe Wilson can shout "you lie," when when Obama's State of the Union address in which he criticizes the Supreme Court for its decision on Citizens United, which is the worst Supreme Court decision of our lifetimes and of our parents and grandparents' lifetimes. It's like, if you like fucking Plessy versus Ferguson, you'll love this shit. I mean, it's that historically bad, right? Obama makes mention of it, and he's getting, ice grilled by the justices in the front row. He's getting finger pointed on the tarmac at airports. Like, all of these things are in part deliberate and coded and have to do with race and have to do with the ways in which a black president still sits mighty uneasily with a lot of folks, and the disrespect just on a symbolic level that he's faced with is really rooted in that. I think we have to remember that. Now, race hasn't heated up yet because we haven't hit the general election yet. They're not going at Obama yet, but we're beginning to see the rumblings of it. We're seeing Newt Gingrich talk about Obama as the food stamp president. We're seeing various feints and nods and winks as these guys try to figure out how to energize their base. And as we move to the general election, we're going to see an increasing level of racial coded discussion and divisiveness targeted at Obama, pretty much.
I want to ask you two last things, and then we take the questions. One, in response to something that both in response to what you said. You talked about the way that this kind of racial conversation is heating up. And I think it was 2011, you wrote an essay and a book that was edited by Tracy Sharpley White, and where you talked about race. The book was called The Speech, Race and Barack Obama's A More Perfect Union. It was the speech he gave in Philadelphia, really in the aftermath of all the Jeremiah Wright activity and his kind of response to what was going on racially in the country. And one of the things you said then was that Obama let white people off the hook. Do you feel that his doing that and his continuing to do that is a part of what helps to escalate the other side of the question?
I think what I said in that essay was that in reference to that particular speech, which came after the maelstrom of objections to Reverend Jeremiah Wright and the idea that Obama should distance himself from Wright, and this was threatening to derail his candidacy as a surge forward. What he did in that speech, to me, which was disingenuous and problematic, was he focused really less on the empiric evidence of structural racism and more on how people felt. So what he did rhetorically a number of times in that speech was sort of create a false equation, a falsely balanced equation, where being angry about structural racism was the same as being angry about being seen as a racist, Like, he had to kind of go to the language of the emotional, because that was the only way to put these things on an equal footing. The bitterness felt by white Americans who felt that the country had abandoned them. Essentially, that their own privilege was being reduced, ultimately, is what we're talking about here. Obama had to kind of thread the needle and make these things seem like they were the same, in a sense. So to me, that was a disappointing move. A politically salient one. One of the things he had to do would not have been proven at that moment to alienate white voters. But at that moment, I remember certainly being disappointed by it.
This is the last thing I want to ask you. You said that the majority of whites didn't vote for Obama. We certainly saw in terms of the youth vote, the majority of young whites did vote for Obama.
Yeah.
And more so, 2/3 of young people 18 to 29 who voted for Obama. Given the fact that the national discourse isn't where they're getting, young people are getting these cues from, do you think that this is a testament to hip hop?
I think certainly hip-hop in the last 30 years has been an incredibly potent force, first of all, around putting issues on the table. I mean, for me, my entrance into hip-hop was long enough ago, we're talking mid-'80s, and that by no means makes me a first or second generation hip-hopper. I'm a new cat, you know, in my eyes. But it's hard to convey to young folks today who have grown up in a world where hip-hop is mass culture, and where mass culture is more accessible by far than it ever was to any previous generation in terms of your ability to access it on everything from your smartphone down the line. Hip-hop was under the radar then, and I sought it out because it was the only thing that was articulating some of these realities, some of the injustices in the world, which were very much off the table. Whether it was the Eurocentricity in the education system, American government's investment in apartheid South Africa, police brutality, profiling, all of these things were being articulated by hip-hop at a time when very little else was articulated. For a generation of kids who got into hip-hop back then, I mean, I was getting chills listening to Roots talk about Fight the Power. You know, I remember deeply on a physical level what it felt like to hear that song in 1989, what it felt like to go see the movie in which it appeared, Spike Lee's movie Do the Right Thing, how potent that felt, what it felt like to have hip-hop generation artists like Spike Lee and like Public Enemy bringing the noise on this radically new level at a time when information was very limited and people were very divided, and these conversations could not happen because there was not a common language to articulate some of these beefs. I think that for the last 30 years, hip-hop has, for better and for worse, problematically been the global face of American blackness and American youth on a very deep level. I think that it's impossible to imagine the political or cultural landscape right now without hip-hop. It's also hard to convey to young people today the notion that for an older generation of hip-hoppers, and I use generation more loosely in a hip-hop sense, not the distance between you and your parents or you and your children, but the time it takes to be a teenager. That's what a hip-hop generation is. It's a 5-6 year span of time. That's how fast it all turns over. For folks my age, hip-hop was inextricable from struggle, from protest, from a sense of speaking truth to power, from a sense of being on the margins and trying to get a voice. That was just what it was. All of the art forms were rooted in that. Were rooted in seizing public space, whether it was graffiti on the trains of New York City, which New York City spent $300 million trying to combat between 1973 and 1989, or the way that, you know, b-boying, breakdancing was criminalized, cats were getting arrested for that when they were just doing it, you know, on the street or in the subways, MCing, DJing, the manifestation of hip-hop at the local block party. We all valorized the block party, you know, Cool Herc and Bambaataa, these guys threw these block parties, they threw these park jams. They were not parks with grass. They were schoolyards with fences around them, and they didn't have permits to do that, and they often got shut down, and they were stealing electricity. They were literally stealing power from New York City. So back at these foundational moments, hip-hop was rooted in community, in participation. There was no conception of being a passive observer or a fan. So that generation of folks who understand hip-hop to be activism in itself, in its essence, has grown and has shaped the political discourse. Obama himself is of that time period. He's a little old, he's a bridge generation guy, but there's a sense in which I think hip-hop has given us a common language, and it's reinvigorated politics and pedagogy as well as the art forms that we most closely associate with. So yes, I think that hip-hop has played a tremendous role in the election of Obama, and I think Obama knows that. And what he will do with that knowledge, how much he will invest in the people who put him in office, remains an open question.
Good place at the end. Our organizers, we got time for a few questions? I know we're right on the mark. We started a little bit late though. Anybody here gonna stop me or should just keep it going? All right.
The dude with the sign left, so.
There was a sign? We'll take a few questions. Oh, here she is. Should we stop? Should we take a few questions? Talk to me.
Two questions.
Two questions. Sister right here. We want to get you on the mic if we can.
Stand up, stand up.
So I have this question, once I heard Angela speaking, because I'm a first-time voter, and I want to know what advice you give to me and to other youth who are voting for the first time.
You all are my favorite voters because you're not tainted yet. You haven't had any parties grab a hold of you. I think what you got to do, and this is to anybody in the room that's a first-time voter, what are your own moral and your own philosophy about what you want to see for yourself? You really got to establish that first. And when you establish that first, then technically read about these all different parties to see if what you wrote down about for yourself matches. And do their philosophies flow with yours, okay? And then from there, check and see if these candidates, because some of them don't flow with the philosophy necessarily of their party. They say they're part of that party, but some of them aren't. Prime example, Democrats is just as divided as Republicans. People say, wow, we got blue dogs. Well, what's a blue dog? Blue dog is conservative. He's going to vote conservative ways. He's not going to vote a progressive agenda. So that's why I said, when you write down what it is that you want to see, how you want to see the rest of this world operate, this nation operate, and if that philosophy gels with some of those parties, then by all means, but if not, be a strong independent and take your philosophy sheet and vote your own conscience. And vote who you know is going, at least has similar ideologies, or at least a realistic agenda that meets to what you have down on paper, and vote it that way. But again, that's just one step. You gotta call them back and hold them to what they say they're gonna do. And if your generation don't do that, we're gonna be messed up for another 30 to 40 years.
Thank you.
Let's take this sister right here, because we can't not take days. We're gonna have some problems.
I see you, Shamako.
So this is for Boots. I've been decently active in the Occupy movement, and I just wanted to know, how has music played a part of recruiting youth into the Occupy movement, and how has that motivated you to keep going?
I don't know. This is a really young movement. It's been around for a few months. I've been seeing, and right now I don't have audio on my computer, so I've been listening, but I've been seeing a lot of hip hop with the word "occupy" in it. So I think that probably has something to do with it. A lot of people involved. Definitely, I'll see, a Dead Prez shirt or a Rage Against the Machine shirt or something, like people have come out of that, and I don't know what it is, but so I think it will become more a part of it, and that the movement as it grows will actually create artists. Somebody was asking me who the Bob Dylan of this movement is, and I said that the Bob Dylan of this movement is 12 years old right now, and they're going to see their neighbors get their eviction stopped by the Occupy Wall Street movement. They're going to see their families join militant labor movements that shut down their jobs and get better wages and better housing, and that's going to create artists that are going to speak to folks. But one thing just real quick, since I do have the mic, and I just want to, this whole thing has been kind of skewed around voting, except for what I was saying. And I would like to say this: the New Deal, which included things like Social Security, welfare, all those programs, they didn't come because we elected the right person in office. They came because there were millions of people on the street, and people were shutting down factories all over the country, and profits were being lost, and they needed to do something to quiet folks, to hope that there would be a revolutionary movement that grew. At the time, there was 1 million card-carrying members of the Communist Party in the United States. Affirmative action got passed by Nixon. That's not because he's a good dude. That's because there was a movement growing and they were afraid of revolution. There was revolutions going on all over the world and there was movements here. That's why that happened. The civil rights legislation. Even though there was a campaign to get the black vote, it wasn't about voting someone in. That was a tool to get certain things. And the civil rights legislation was passed under Kennedy, who a few years before said he wouldn't support such a thing. Why was that? Because a movement was growing. If you decide to vote, I vote on propositions and stuff like that, but if you decide to vote for somebody, just know your vote isn't going to matter unless you join a movement. Your vote is how you call somebody back, as she was saying. You only call them back by making the politicians are puppets. We got to go for the puppet masters. Once we make the puppet masters afraid of losing profit, they're going to tell their puppets what to do. And that's how it's going to have to work. Because there is no historical data to show that a movement around electing someone is the way that you get substantial social change. So we shouldn't, I don't think that should be our path. I think that people, you got that Tuesday open, go vote, but don't think that that's the part of the social change that we need. We need a movement. Often though, sometimes the movement to elect somebody tries to usurp the movement that actually can stop profit. We saw the anti-war movement in 2004, it turned into a pro-carry movement, and it was big, and all of a sudden it was gone. And it was for electing somebody that said didn't even say they were against the war. Then it got built up again, 2008, Obama was gone. So it takes a lot of work to get somebody in the office. It takes a lot of time and effort. Let's put some time and effort into confronting the basis of exploitation, and that's where profit and the people meet.
My question is for you, Boots, and Shamako. There's been a lot of stuff that hasn't been talked about, and I want to know if either one of you all can address it and give some light. And I'm coming from the context of even the very best of us tend to validate and invalidate actions, people, and movements themselves based upon what we see or don't see on TV. So, for example, Shamako, you went on a tour, a poor people's tour, that got very little coverage, but a whole lot of things were going on.
That's ironic, they did it next year.
But I want to know if you could talk about that, because that's very significant, because this was before Occupy and just going around and dealing with poor people in all these different states. And I think that's important that people know, and they should be asking, why wasn't that covered? Because it's very newsworthy. Boots, you know, with us in Occupy, many people to this day don't realize 100,000 people showed up to shut down the ports, not once, but twice. And the fact that people are still thinking like, first of all, people don't know that this happened, and second of all, they don't know the sheer numbers of people who came out in spite of the negative campaign against it. Maybe you can speak to that, because I think it heightens the type of disillusionment that they're putting out there.
Okay, before you guys answer, understand that we are really out of time, so y'all can be as brief as possible. I don't want to disrespect the organizers. You know, I want to be respectful of the time. Dave, thanks for a great question, and I think we really get into the meat of this, which is why we tended like this a little bit longer, but we're working with the time that's given to us. So, short answers, and then we're going to wrap it up. Thanks for the question.
Well, not only do people know the sheer numbers that came out, they don't know the political effect that it immediately was having. These emails have come out from city government, and 2 days into Occupy Oakland encampment, they had written up an eviction letter. It obviously wasn't about breaking windows, because none of that stuff happened. Obviously wasn't. They had already been ready, but they were scared of how they would look. After Occupy Oakland called for a general strike, their email said, we need to come up with 5 ways that show that we are down with the 99%. And they immediately brought back this program, which was to refurbish a few bank-owned properties to give to poor people. They weren't talking anything about that before that happened, and that's how political change can get made.
Shamako, you got the last word.
One thing I forgot, so the Hip Hop Chess Federation also started here itself as a tentative speaking over at the Martin Luther King Library, trying to get that away from my little San Jose list. So, yeah, in 2010 we went on a cross-country march from New Orleans to Detroit, which is basically the south of the Rust Belt, which if you have any knowledge about its history and the development of America, they're 2 critical places that land us where we are today, nationally and internationally. And Dave, you've been here for a few things. Not just people to know about the march itself, right? But people to know about the U.S. Social Forum. There's 20,000 people there imagining a new country, right? And then, of course, we go to 2008, the Republican National Convention, there were 10,000 people at that march. They said it was 2, right? So if we get in this situation repeatedly over and over and over again, I'll say real quickly. We're in a country that doesn't have any good class analysis. I don't know, I mean, not to say that individually we don't, or that your professor doesn't, or that occasionally some people don't. Collectively speaking, we're just getting to that. That's like one of the best things I feel like Occupy did, or is doing, is creating space for, because, you know, as Booth mentioned earlier, when we think of class, we think of like middle class or poor or rich. Really think about the concept of middle though. I mean, we're talking billionaires to people making nothing, right? So the middle would be like $500 million, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's not what we're talking about, we're talking about middle. We're talking about the difference between 10,000, 30,000, 60,000, and 100,000, which is just varying layers of populism, just to get technical about it. So to answer the question, why don't people know? Because for the most part, we're in an environment where we're being lied to because it's corporately owned and run. And right now, what's happening is we're in what is literally a war for virtually everything. Water, air, your brain, your heart, your children. I'm not trying to be dramatic. This is happening right now. So, in essence, please be aware, please be awake, know that they're lying, and they're not going to tell you most of the stuff that you need to know, so you will have to come to stuff like this, occasionally search the internet, and seek it on your own. So, I'm in there.
It's a great